Don't be surprised to find a lot of mess in the CI/CD environment. But before you go and scream at the developers about the mess, first learn about how we got there by understanding their daily jobs.
Welcome to CyberOxTales, the podcast where cybersecurity scenarios meet reality. In each episode, we'll sit together with the top cyber pros to dissect major security incidents, giving you actionable insights and practical advice to fuel your playbooks and success. Ready? Let's go.
Hi, I'm Neatsun Ziv. I will be your host today at CyberOxTales. And today I've got with me a friend and a very important person that will teach us a lot about CI/CD and non-human identities. Mario, it's a pleasure having you here. Why don't you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this program, Neatsun. A little bit about myself. I guess I've been in the security industry for over 25 years. And my last run at a company was at a small startup called Snowflake. And I joined Snowflake back in 2014. And we didn't have any security teams in those days. We had to build it. I had to build it from the ground up. I stepped down from the CISO position last year and retired. So now I'm doing podcasts, advising, investing, etc.
So I want to take you directly into today's topic, which is CI/CD security. And I want to start with a very simple question. It's, first of all, why do we need actually visibility into the CI/CD? Why not just say, you know what? We know where we're running it. We know who are our developers, and it will be fine. What's the inside there?
I'll give you just from my own experiences. I started my career back in the late 90s working for a big four. And I was trained to break into companies. We got paid. It was like the old red team pen testing activities. And one of the things that was grilled in our heads early on is go to the QA environments and go to the development environments. Don't target production if you don't have to. And it's a really simple reason. And it's funny because it's the same stuff that was happening back in the late 90s. You think we would have learned. Fast forward to now, we would have learned from our lessons. But the reality is simple. There is, in the QA or in the development environment, there's a lot of moving parts, less predictable. A lot of developers may be running some new code, some new features. They're downloading new libraries that may not necessarily go into production. Hence the reason why it's in a development environment or a QA environment, right? And because of that, it's really hard to monitor activities happening in that environment where things are constantly shifting and moving. I guess maybe with some advancements in AI, which I'm not saying they've done it yet, but potentially we may be able to make sense of a lot of this heterogeneous, unpredictable environment. So that in itself, that unpredictability as a blue team person makes it really hard to defend, makes it really hard to determine what's authorized or what's not authorized, what's good and what's bad.
Maybe I'll add to that something. I think that one of the interesting cases or the interesting facts about QA and R&D organization is that it moves in a very high space. It requires a lot of passwords to get into things and connect to other systems. And whenever you've got a very important management initiative, somehow it gets to involve engineering as part of it. So they get access to things first. And this is also where usually things get, I would say on the other side, getting to move towards new projects and just leaving the old ones with all the credentials inside the code and a lot of other things.
There's I don't know if it's an understanding or a philosophy, but as you move into production, things become more static. They're already baked. You're not making changes in the production environment. And that's a general statement. It depends on the health, the maturity of your company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But more often than not, you're not making these big changes in production. You're doing a lot of it in the dev and the QA environment. And there's a lot of I wouldn't say less controls, but just less oversight. And certainly less oversight by security people. And so people need to start sharing passwords. Or they may not have the right password strength or the way to access that environment. And you've seen it. We've seen it in the past. A lot of the security incidents that ultimately manifest themselves in production occurred in the CI/CD in a development environment. That's where badness tends to happen.
So one of the companies that I used to work for had a no password that everybody in the company used to know. It was a very simple password. And this was like the common norm. And I think just, I would probably say in the past 4 or 5 years, everybody started to understand that maybe it's not a smart idea to have one single password that everybody in the company knows. And that people that used to work in the same company 10 years before that also know this company and it was never changed. Maybe not the smartest idea. So I'll try to get from it. So can you give me some idea about what are the interesting gaps that the industry experiences today in things that are related to the CI/CD gaps?
I would always start with, it's always important to have visibility. What's happening in that environment? What code is being uploaded? What libraries are being used by your developers? The reason it's important to have visibility is because changes that are happening in a development environment, this is not new. This is not, wow, incredible thought idea here that I'm proposing. But things that happen in a dev can and will often manifest themselves in production. Not all of them, but a significant portion of it, right? It's a development environment, for the love of goodness, right? It's gonna have to go somewhere. Following that trace, understanding who did what, when, and from where, and even as simple as, hey, I downloaded this open source library that I'm going to use to develop X for my product in the product environment, even knowing where that was downloaded from, whether it's trusted or not. And then more importantly, is that the same library that you were testing that's manifesting themselves in production? It's being used in production. Why do I say that? Because there's a lot of opportunities when there's a lack of visibility for an attacker to take advantage of that, to introduce suspect code that will ultimately get access into your production environment. And that's where things get interesting, to say the least.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, the more complex the environment, the more developers you have, the more legacy code that you have, you're going to see some weird things going on. And you see places where we were scanning production and we're seeing instances running over there saying, what is this? We have no idea where did this come from. There is no build that created this. How is it even running over there?
Yep.
Everybody's looking at each other and saying, I don't know, it was there when I got here. And we just thought it's not something that we should take down.
And I also think there's also, we talk about this in the security community, how I'm not picking on auditors, okay? Please, I'm not. This is, anybody who listens to this, I'm not picking on auditors. It's the basic facts that oftentimes you'll have a lot of auditors focus on vulnerability, like vulnerable libraries. What's vulnerable, what's critical, what's high, and then how quickly you patched it, how quickly you identify and how quickly you patch it. And I tell you, a lot of CISOs and a lot of security people are really frustrated with that. Log4j is an example of that. Yes, you might have some library within a library, a package with it that has libraries within libraries that may contain some of these log4j, but they never manifest themselves. It's never used. Yet, log4j, we spent a ton of resources and money fixing this problem that maybe never was going to ever manifest itself. In other words, it was never going to be exploited by an attacker. I'm not saying go don't take care of the log4j or those libraries that are vulnerable, but maybe you reduce the criticality of how quickly you got to take care of them if you really know if they're being used in your environment.
I think that's a great segue towards the next question, because Log4j is an event that created a lot of visibility towards this field. And now let's say, night of the event, you need to go to your management, to your peers, and explain, look, we've got an event, something technical details. I need to change all the work plan for 100 people for the coming few weeks or months. How do you think about it? What are the things that go through your mind when you start reading and getting feedback from your peers saying something big is happening? It's not just a vulnerability. Take me through this and how do you communicate?
I'm going to shift a little bit of that and simply to say I was talking to this government representative from the US government. And of course I was whining about this whole vulnerability, and I can only reduce criticality from one level down in FedRAMP. So even though criticality is critical, public is critical, in my environment, it's low. But I can't. In the federal government, the FedRAMP framework, I can only go from critical to high. I can only go one step down. And that has a time period. So I was really frustrated with, and this is really taken away from what we should be focusing on, other security things that are more important. And what he said to me was really interesting. It's more about the process of the company, of the vulnerability process, rather than the actual patching. It demonstrates a level of sophistication to understand what's running in your environment, have that visibility, and follow it through from a CI/CD to production. Okay, what does that mean for other things besides vulnerability? Imagine you have a security incident, somebody's breached your CI/CD code. How are you able to know that code from an employee was entered by the right employee and approved by the right employee in your development environment, and that then gets deployed to production? Does that make sense?
We definitely had some interesting cases, or almost near hit cases like XDTL and so on. But the question for me is how do you go and communicate this to your management? Because this is usually technical details that managers are usually not aware of how the sausage is made, especially in engineering. And I need to go and tell them something. Look, there's a zone in your company. You're not aware of it. It has an issue. How do you communicate this? Teach the audience what are the things that you might think of saying, these are the steps I would go through.
Yeah, I guess one example is generic statements. You got to know your audience, right? But let's just say your team reports to the CFO, right? So CFO is going to worry about financial stuff. Let's just talk about financial. You're a public company. You got to do financial reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So you got to make sure. A common example is to say, let's say you have a sandwich place, and the person who's making your sandwich, it's not the same person who's going to be in the cash register. And the reason they do that is to have a way of balancing. There's no cheating going on. Somebody's giving you an extra slice of cheese that they're shooting and charging you less. So there's that kind of separation of duty. That's really what you're looking at if you can translate that to the world of technology and why these things, these checks and balances are important in this environment. And so imagine if you, as part of imagine you go to your GitHub or GitLab. So I'm not picking on GitHub or GitLab here, okay? But imagine a year or 2 years ago, Neatsun, you and I both belong to the same company. We both log into GitHub, but we were both authenticated. But now I'm going to upload code. I'm going to upload code, me, Mario, and I'm going to change the metadata to show that it was Neatsun who did it, not me. Now you can see the problem there, right? That's non-repudiation. And that's not a technical term. Non-repudiation, it comes from the financial and accounting world. That's an example of how you translate. If you have a system, so now you can say, okay, what does that mean, Mario? If you are selling some product and you do not have well-defined separation of duties and non-repudiation, then there's a lot of potential for folks who enter suspect code, intentionally or unintentionally, that can often impact your production and often impact your customers. And that may be able to maybe slow down sales. I'm not saying permanently, depending on how the situation is, but it can certainly have some impact in financial, temporarily at least.
So if I'm giving digest to what we just said, is number one, know your audience. Second, tailor an analogy to the term and only then explain what does it actually mean in our terms.
Correct.
Sandwich factory, separation of duty. We have a problem here that is similar to that, more complicated, and we need to make major changes now because we have it.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on. So, why do you think that the problem hadn't been solved to date, but instead of being solved, it's constantly morphing and changing?
Boy, I'm going to say a dirty secret in this industry. Okay. As an engineer, you don't move up in a company or in your role. You don't become an IC4 or an individual contributor 4, IC5, IC principal, et cetera, by managing your Jenkins instance or by writing scripts in your automation for your CI/CD code. Most engineers want to do really sexy stuff, cool stuff. So I think most of these environments have been neglected. It is not what's going to make, I'm not excited. It's boring stuff. It's not even my code anymore. Or yeah, I'm using some code, but it's more about writing some scripts to run some code inside my CI/CD. It's not going to get a lot of the attention, a lot of the experts in your company's attentions. It's often neglected. Really, that's in my opinion, one of the biggest problems. Now, I think people are starting to recognize that you need to pay attention to it. Why? Okay. In the last 5-7 years, and it's like, I'm sound generic as all heck, but the shift left has really occurred. It's happened. And a lot of companies are shifting their code left. They're not making changes in production anymore. The days of you logging into your AWS console and opening up a security group or changing an IAM policy manually, those days they're done. It doesn't happen. Most of it is happening through Terraform. And as an example. And so what is this Terraform happening? A lot of the code is going through, hopefully, GitHub. Somebody's looking at it. Somebody's checking it in. Maybe the right employee, hopefully, and somebody reviews it, make sure that it's not going to be production. They run the testing in the dev environment, and then eventually gets moved to production. So a lot of that stuff is starting to happen and shifting left. Okay. So now we know things are happening in an environment. Things that can manifest themselves in production are happening in a less secure environment, less oversight, less controls. As an attacker, I'm going to go look. You don't win kudos as an attacker by breaking into the hardest part of a company's security controls. You're an opportunist. You go look for that window that was left open in the back door. Yeah. You don't try to break the front door, try to see if I can get in. You go around and see, let me see in the backyard. Did they leave a window open? That's what attackers look for. They look for the easy hanging fruits to get in. That's what the CI/CD is. That's what development is.
Okay, so you said something very interesting for me, which is once in a while, you just don't go into AWS anymore and just do changes on a specific machine. But sometimes you need to do things that are, I would say, infrastructure change or rotate keys or things that really go back to the fundamentals. And you still need to go and sometimes have downtime or a major impact to the organization. How do you communicate this to peers and management saying, look, guys, it's time to do something that is not what we've done until now. Let's have some downtime or whatever it is that might impact users or engineers?
That is a tough question to ask or to require from your peers. You really have to, one, be empathetic to them and understand where in the release cycle they're at. So there are some downtimes during a company. It's not always constantly release code. There are some downtimes that you might be able to take advantage. You also need to bring in the people and bring them into your journey and speak to them instead of using, I'm security. This is what you got to go do. Thou shalt do this. That tends, if it works once, it may work, but afterwards it will not work. People are not going to want to work with you. I think it's really important to just go look at how these shared secrets that people are using today, how they can easily walk around. And these shared secrets are no longer, and when I share secret, think of it as an API key or a secret token to allows you to make movements from one environment to the other environment. Again, because you lack that visibility, goodness, if you don't know who that user was who did that and where's that particular, the problem with these API keys or keys for service accounts, as I like to call them, or workloads to workload, is that they often walk around. They often leave the confines of that environment, and sometimes they're in people's laptops. I tell you one story. There was a developer who was setting up an API key in their AWS environment. And the way they were doing it was, and this key, this access token, allowed them, it had some elevated privilege in their production environment. The way they did it was they were working from home, they were in a hurry, and they opened their browser and typed in this, share these keys to their browser. Okay. Now, this was their home laptop. It wasn't even their work laptop. Don't ask me why. I'm telling you, this is how it happens at times. And apparently, the engineer was letting his kid use his laptop to play games. And the kid downloaded suspect code one time, unbeknownst to the engineer, the father, the dad. The suspect code had an info stealer that lived in the browser of that laptop of that engineer. And the info stealer, they're getting smart. They're harvesting things. And they want to see, it's not like I want to go to everywhere and collect all this information, which you do. You can do that as an attacker. Why not? You have a lot of compute availability out there, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, you're looking for particular URLs and destinations that are attractive, and you begin to harvest them. This shared token, was entered by the employee through their browser, which their kid had downloaded suspect code and didn't know that. The info stealer grabbed that information, and that attacker, within a couple of months, broke into the company's production environment.
I think what I'm hearing you say behind the scenes are two things. One is be a storyteller. Don't say yes, no. Say what happened to others and why you should be wary about this use case. And I'm here to provide to you guidance on why you should not do that. And this is just one example. Instead of just saying, just don't do that. And just tell them why.
I think it's basic human nature. This is, why do we have books? Why do we ever create books? Why do we do storytelling? Why do we ever do that? Because humans have this capability of sharing information, sharing stories, sharing things that could potentially you can learn from them, so you avoid them. It's called wisdom. In the old days, you had the older folks who had lived longer than you, had experienced a lot, and I noticed some things in the past not to do that. And they tell it to you through tales, through books. So this is no different. Human beings learn through stories.
First of all, I want to thank you very much for all of your wisdom. But I do want to poke one thing, which is, how do you communicate this to developers? The last question, just how do you take it back to developer and explain to them? Because they're usually busy, stressed. They've got so many different tasks. They've got production issues, quality issues, functionality issues. How do you get enough attention to security stories to be out there, for them even to be educated on the risk, on the existence of the risks?
I think you need to first be an active listener. First, you listen to how they do their job. Don't go and tell them you're doing something wrong. You want to first learn. What is it that they're doing? It's not like you want to know their day-to-day activities, but you want to learn their pain factor, empathize with them. And they say, I get it. You need to do that. I hate to say shortcuts, but a lot of engineers, and I was an engineer, I hate to say we're lazy. We try to look for shortcuts. We try to make it easier for ourselves. And sometimes that can get us in trouble. I think you first want to listen to the person. Then you want to inform that person. If you're in a startup, I would argue early on in a startup, if you have a major security data breach, most of those early startups are not going to survive. And I would think that a lot of us in the startup in business, we're probably not taking these big paychecks, payrolls. We actually try to maybe get some shares. None of us want to work at a company who's going to go belly up. And you certainly don't want to be the contributing factor for going belly up on that. So what I'm trying to say, Neatsun, is empathize with them and then make a connection on how all that work that they're doing can potentially be impacted by certain actions in a really negative way. Ultimately, why are you doing that? And I think most human beings are going to understand, they're going to be reasonable. I'm not saying all of them, but a majority of them will. And the other ones, the exceptions, there's other techniques you have to use.
Mario, I think that hopefully the audience got a lot of insights from today's conversation. I know that I have, especially on the human side. It's create a connection. You'll be heard better after you make the connection and tell the story and help them in their journey instead of just trying to explain the security piece. Be a human first and then try to communicate the security afterwards.
Yes. Yes. If there's anything we could say, yes.
As always, it's amazing to learn and talk with you. So I want to thank you very much, and I'll see you next time in the valley.
Awesome. Talk to you later.
That's a wrap on another episode of CyberOxTales. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your peers. Visit us at ox.security/podcast to access all episodes and exclusive content or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.